Welcome to Musicians Roundtable. Today, we're very happy to have as our guest David Starobin. David has just completed and released a recording of the 19th century composer Matiegka, his opus 31, which is comprised of 6 sonatas. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's good to be here.
Yes. And so, first of all, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you came to be connected to Matiegka and his work.
Well, I guess I'd have to go back about 30 or so years when I started, maybe even 35 years. I started playing guitar music on 19th century instruments. I used French instruments and English instruments first, and then I came to Viennese instruments, the Stauffer family of instruments with adjustable action and built a bit smaller than the traditional Spanish guitar that we've come to use in this century. The music flowed from the instrument. I started playing a lot of Sor, a lot of Giuliani in particular, a Viennese contemporary of Matiekka. And that ultimately led to finding some scores that indicated that this was a really exceptional composer and not the usual unknown composer from this period. There are many of them. We have a ton of music published during this first flowering of the guitar in the first 20 years of the 19th century. So I looked through a lot of music, and Matiekka stood out, and I started playing the scores, and only about perhaps 12 or 13 years ago did I actually really seriously look into the music and begin to play a lot of it.
I, I've noticed that one of the things that in the scores themselves that distinguished Matiekka from the other 19th century contemporaries of his is the amazing abundance of articulations, dynamics, phrasing marks, and so on. And has that been something that has guided your exploration and interpretations?
Yeah, it really has, and I feel that the demands of the score, which enter into a lot of different areas, expression markings. We find espressivo markings all over, dolce markings, just local detail where he'll say, for these three notes, I want it to be expressive. And then the accentuation, which is a bit of a mystery. It comes in various different forms, but it is profusely notated so that it's unlike most other composers for guitar of this period. The exception, I would say, is the early publications of Giuliani, the stuff from 1807, 1808, the early opus numbers, where for some reason the publishers allowed Giuliani to also use this kind of extreme markings of dynamics and expression, although not to the degree that Matiekka uses it. It was not unheard of, and certainly we begin to to figure out a style from these publications, from the early Giuliani publications, from the Matiekka publications, and Matiekka's music the publications run only for about 16 or 17 years. But during that time, we see that there's almost a steady progression in his use of markings for expression. And these particular sonatas, which are his last opus number, the six opus 31 sonatas, are absolutely full of so many directions that the player has to make several really important decisions. We really need to find out what kind of an instrument is it that will allow us to play all of these markings, the sforzandi, the staccati, the tenutos, the different dynamic range from 2Ps up to 2Fs. Um, all of these things require what I consider unusual kinds of techniques for the modern guitarist. So I had to first, and this was a big search. I went through a lot of different instruments playing this music on. I've recorded them on Lacotes, which proved not to be the right guitar. They simply did not have the flexibility of action set up to allow for the kind of accentuation Matiegka calls for. Uh, and then finally, I started playing them on a Stauffer copy, one that was built by Gary Southwell. That was very enlightening because it really seemed to be the right style of instrument for the music. And then ultimately, I came to Hermann Hauser's guitars. I've owned 3 or 4 of them that all were built in the Viennese style. I have one here. You can see this is its standard bridge that we see quite often. It has an adjustable action right here, so that if you feel that when you accent too hard, it gets ugly, you simply put a key right here, twist it, and the action is raised.
Wow.
And so I have been able to use these guitars pretty much exclusively for the last 7 or 8 years playing Matiekka's music, and they work ideally for me. I haven't found an instrument that I think suits the music better. One other thing, on these guitars in general, uh, uh, there's a match between left hand articulation and plucked sound that is much closer in dynamic level than on modern guitars, where the attack is very powerful, and so the consequent left-hand articulation is much softer, and so they don't quite match as well as the Viennese style instruments do, and so this instrument really allowed me, I think, to use almost all of the articulation that Matiekka suggests, and which other guitarists on modern guitars might find more problematic to realize.
Yes, I'm remembering when you played his A minor sonata in Los Angeles a few years ago. And was this the guitar that you used?
It was, yeah. It's a 1935 Hauser, and it's been my main guitar for the past 7 or 8 years at least.
So, from an audience and listening perspective, what was remarkable for me about it was the really the clarity and the dynamic range and the subtlety. Everything that you did in softer dynamics, all the way up through more strong dynamics, came through in great balance and variety, and that really I can attest that it really worked, really quite well.
Yeah. My opinion is that he was a great builder. It's not, I'm not alone. I don't, everybody who's played these instruments knows. From, Segovia knew it, Bream knew it. He's just a builder who learned to focus um, the entire registral range that the instrument has, and that perhaps more than anything else, that clarity through the registers is what I think distinguishes the instruments from other instruments.
That's fantastic. Now, regarding Opus 31, you mentioned that it's his last opus number, and I know that there are 6 sonatas. When I look through that opus, it's remarkable to me how much variety there is in his sonata form. That each sonata is different. It's clear that he did not have a sonata form recipe such as you might find in the form books for 19th century sonata form, and that every single one has its own kind of life and architectural structure. How do you find in terms of the whole opus, that variety of compositional approaches.
Yeah, well, my interpretive approach certainly has been continuous in terms of change and digging deeper into the scores. And I must say, I view the recording that I've made of the six sonatas as just another step on the path that guitarists will follow to realize these pieces in a deeper way. I'm like in any recording. I found that afterwards I had all sorts of things that I would have done differently, but that's always the case with recordings. These pieces, though, in particular, I think offer big challenges. As you mentioned, each of the sonatas has really a different profile. The first one in C major, I think, is very lyrical, but it's also volatile. In the middle of the first movement, it breaks into this 16th note kind of Sturm und Drang kind of passage that comes as quite a shock because textually we've had nothing to prepare us for this. The second sonata, um, I may be reading this into it, but to me it seems by far the most tragic, and so I played that rather in a restrained manner, I think, and I do a big wind up for the last variation of the theme and variations that sort of is a disappearing kind of funeral march because that's really what it is there. And The third sonata in G major, complete opposite of the second. It's very bright, very modulating all over the place in the first movement, and a very traditional kind of Beethovenian scherzo, and a little folk dance for the third movement. The fourth sonata, the E minor, uh, maybe that's the best composition. It's runner up or the best with the B minor, and the E minor. Uh, the perhaps the most interesting characteristic is its last movement, which is a capriccio that goes from sort of sustained adagio material to a very fast kind of E minor dance, back to adagio, back to the E minor fast dance, and finally winding up as an adagio. The fifth sonata in D major, I think it really sounds like he was listening to a lot of Mozart and Haydn at the time, as everybody was, and the models from those composers are quite clear, and I think we hear that in the D major. The B minor is the other one that might be the best of the six sonatas. It's contrapuntal. The first movement is really, it's so wonderful. I maybe compositionally the first movement of the B minor is the best music that we hear in the whole set. It's got a really nice scherzo, virtuoso scherzo in the middle, and then a dance for the little rondo dance for its finale, and it's more of a virtuoso piece along the lines of the two grand sonatas that are the other bigger sonatas that he published.
It seems to me that, um, of course, I'm frustrated that he didn't compose more because there's no sense, I've no sense in looking through all the different music that I've been able to find of his that he got into a mode of repeating what he had done years ago. He was constantly exploring new approaches to what he was doing. Is there any um, historical information as to why he changed? I know I've read only that he started working as a church composer and wrote liturgical pieces.
Yeah. Well, I think the progression of his career was very much that of an itinerant musician who was trying to make a living. He did also clerical and legal work on the side to make his bread, and I think that the guitar frankly, in the last 5 years of between 1815 and 1820, things slowed down. When Giuliani left in 1819, when he left Vienna, the instrument was deprived of its great figure. And in Viennese music, at that time, Giuliani was a great soloist, and the city heard his concerti, his chamber music, his solo performances, and he certainly led the field. After he left Vienna, because perhaps the same reasons that Matiegka gave up the guitar, they were broke. I mean, Giuliani was chased to the edge of the city by the police, trying to collect debts, and this is, I mean, you speak of the tragedy that befell musicians who tried to be creative and were able to make a go of it for a while. Giuliani fell into that category where he simply was not making enough money to pay his debts and his living expenses, and so he had to leave. And that really, I think, was a real blow to Viennese music, which went on, and the guitar went on, and there were other composers and other virtuosi, but I don't think there was one of the stature of Giuliani at that time. And so Matiegka fell by the wayside. I think he understood that the guitar was not really doing as well as it had in those previous 15 or so years. And church, being a church musician, I can't tell you how many of my friends who are composers ended up as church musicians for making a living. Be an organist, be a choir director, be a singer. This was steady income. The Lord was meeting every Sunday, and the congregation was meeting every Sunday, and there was money to be had, and I think that was what drove Matiegka to church music. I'm quite sure.
I haven't been able to find it, but I would be really interested to hear some performances of his church music or music other than the guitar. In the last number of years, I've found, for example, in 20th century music, it was a complete revelation for me to hear and listen to Villalobos's, for example, his string quartets, which are magnificent,
Oh yeah,
wild, wonderful
and
works,
lots of them.
and lots of them. He was so prolific. Um, and so I think that just in terms of understanding composers, to be able to look at outside of the boundaries of the big names of the guitar composers, almost all of them wrote other music. And it's Matiegka is someone that I hope someday that someone will record some of his things. I'm sure that they were nicely done. So in terms of that great fluorescence of 19th century guitarists, of Giuliani, Sor, Aguado, and Matiegka, how do you if you're going to construct a pantheon, where would he be placed in a pantheon of those?
Yeah, well, he certainly, of the sonata writers, was the most prolific. So you would have to begin there, and you'd have to say, we've got a dozen um, quite reasonable sonatas by Matiegka, and there is simply no other. I mean, perhaps Carulli has that, but I don't put Carulli, even though he has some nice pieces. I don't put him at the compositional level of either Sor or Matiegka, or even Giuliani for that matter. Uh, um, I I hate the ranking system, but um, I think by virtue of the fact that he was able to write 12 really good sonata pieces, I think this puts Matiegka in his own category. He figured out how to do this, how to make modulations that worked, how to have variety, develop themes both in the development sections when there is that, and also in the recapitulations, which give us more development. So I think he was different because he was a pianist, and so we get bass lines in Matiegka that make a little bit more sense in terms of the overall history of Western music and where it was going during these years. Um, you know, the kinds of things that where Mozart would harken back to Bach, and Haydn the same, and then Beethoven back to Haydn and Bach, and all of them looking at these independent left hand lines for the musical value. And this is something that not so many guitarists did. Sohr, chiefly among the other composers, was the person who did that and who would write counterpoint. You would get bass lines, top lines, and middle voices in Sohr that made contrapuntal logical sense. Matiegka also does that, but he's also tied into something that's very wonderful in my opinion, and that is the folk music of the Viennese and Germans in this period. And so we get all sorts of voicings, strange voicings that don't come from traditional counterpoint lessons, and really they color his music in a way in that no other guitar composer of this period reminds me of. Giuliani, to an extent, they knew each other, and maybe they were close. We don't know that, but there's a Matiegka a serenade dedicated to Giuliani for violin and guitar, and of course, I think Giuliani was so active as a chamber musician, and Matiegka, maybe his best piece, I think, is that second trio for guitar, violin, and viola. Magnificent piece. It's a piece that I would not be surprised if Franz Schubert had heard this piece and said, "Okay, I'm gonna use some of this," because I mean there are things in that where we don't hear it till years later in Schubert and in pieces like the Trout, where there are passages that are just similar in harmony, in counterpoint, and in melodic shape. So there's clearly there was so much crossbreeding in this small musical community. I mean, Vienna at the time, 50,000 residents with, I don't know how many concerts a night. There were, little house concerts, 15, 20 a night. Everyone was going to music. Everyone wanted to hear music, and they all heard each other's music. So, everyone's hero was Beethoven. There's no question about that during those years. And then they looked back at Mozart and Haydn, and as Matiegka definitely did, and he rearranged their pieces all the time, just the way Schubert took Matiekka's Motorno and made a quartet out of it. It was done, and there was a cross fertilization that was the most healthy thing that could happen in music. I so wish I could spend a few weeks in that place, at that time. Wow.
Yeah, I was just having the same thought as you were speaking, that if there was a little bit of time travel that our maybe Elon Musk can help us develop that. I would really like to go to Vienna early 19th century.
Oh,
And
boy.
when I read somewhere, I think that Giuliani may have played the cello in the premiere of Beethoven's Sixth Symphony.
Seventh.
In the seventh, yes.
Yeah.
And I think Giuliani also toured with Hummel. So they were so many great musicians and
Well,
so many interconnections.
just about that point, Giuliani was such a figure that on the concert brochure, the poster for the premiere of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, it actually lists guest soloists, even though he wasn't a soloist, but he led the cello section, Giuliani did, and he's listed on the poster in advertisement of the coming premiere of the Seventh Symphony. That's, a very strange thing to do that. No orchestra lists a principal cellist on the concert poster. So Giuliani had some standing at that time.
Well, so I'm I'm so pleased that you have released this recording. I think many people are going to enjoy discovering your performances, and then going further. For me, so many times the absolute litmus test of a performance that I go to see or listen to is when I want to go get the music and play it myself, or at least if it's chamber music, study the score and so forth. And so I'm feel really sure that your recording is going to be of benefit to so many people, and it's a great event in the midst of this the awful things going on in the world today, that there's blossoming of creative and potent expressions of in our world, in the world of music, in the world of guitar. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing about your recording. And for those who are listening to this, when you look in the YouTube description, I will have links to where you can find the recording of David and other things that are connected to Matiegka. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and wishing you the best, and we'll see how it all plays out.
Thanks, Jeff. A pleasure.